Hey everyone, my name's Mia, and today I would like to share with you my New Age to Jesus testimony. I was in the New Age for probably most of my life in ways that I didn't even realize until I came out of it, and now looking back I can see it clearly. And one of the biggest things that really helped me to see the truth about the New Age and come out of it was actually watching other people's New Age to Jesus testimonies here on YouTube. And so I thought it would be time to just share mine with you as well. And before I get into this, I just want to say that all of this is meant to bring glory to God. I am in no way glorifying anything that I went through, anything that might seemingly appear to be good in some ways that I experienced in the New Age. It is not meant to glorify my old life whatsoever by sharing this. This is completely for God, and it's only possible because of Him. And anybody that I share about in my story, I just want you guys to know that I have forgiven these people, and I have no ill will intention to bash them in any ways. This is just me sharing the truth about what happened in my life. And I bring no ill intentions by sharing any of this, by talking about those people. I'm going to be keeping those names anonymous and all of that as well. So going back to my childhood, I was never really raised in a Christian home at all. My mom, she grew up Mormon, and when she grew up and moved out, she kind of went on her own way. I don't really know what her spiritual beliefs were, but I know that she just really encouraged me to think for myself and didn't really push any sort of religious beliefs on me. My dad was also very open spiritually. I know that he really resonates with a lot of Buddhist sort of things. He also was involved with Scientology for some time. And so I think that there was a lot of sort of New Agey sorts of things that were shared with me from a really young age, even if that wasn't the intention. My dad is an amazing person. I have such a good relationship with him to this day. I always have, and I always will. And he's been an incredible father to me. And so I don't think that he ever intended to do any harm by any means. But, as I go through the story, I'm going to be sharing what I see through a Christian lens about what happened in my life. Some of the things that I didn't realize while I was going through it until now, looking back at those things that happened, I can see it with a clearer lens. And so with my dad being involved in Scientology, and also with my mom having left the Mormon church, both of those religions are false religions, and they open doors up to different spiritual realms. And so because my parents were in agreement with these different theologies at different points in their lives, even if they weren't active in those churches anymore when I was growing up, it was still something that they at some point had opened a door to. And since they didn't have Jesus, that door never really got closed. And so I think that looking at my childhood, I can see how that really opened the door for me to be influenced by different things. And so as I grew up, I was having a lot of just strange experiences. I grew up seeing ghosts all the time. I grew up having demonic dreams. I grew up having really uncomfortable dreams, dreams that were highly sexual at an age that I had no idea what that even meant or what that even was. I'm talking 5-6 years old, I was having demonic sexual dreams. And I know that there was a history of trauma on my mom's side of the family that's related to sexual trauma. And so I believe that that has opened up a door for me to be influenced by those things. Even if there was no sexual abuse in my childhood, there was in my lineage. And so that got passed down to me in the spiritual realm. And so I was having all of these demonic dreams at a really young age, and I was seeing ghosts. And I also always talked to my dad about aliens. I remember at a really young age us talking about how aliens are probably totally real, they're probably out there, and how it was just like a common thing for me to think about the supernatural at a really young age. Now, my mom and my dad split up when I was 2 years old. My mom, unfortunately, she really struggled with her mental health. She struggled with alcoholism, and that was really, really hard for me at a young age. So growing up with my mom, which I was primarily with her, I was with her during, 5 days of the week, and then on the weekends I would be with my dad. And when I was with my mom, I never really knew what I was going to be coming home to. It was a constant roller coaster where sometimes things would be really good and the house would be all cleaned up and she would be super happy, and very loving and very encouraging. And then other times I would come home and she had been drinking for the entire day, or she was hungover from the day before, and there was no food, there was no stability. She would get angry about different things, and that was just kind of the norm in my childhood. I just didn't know what it was like to have consistency, and I think that really influenced my view of God as I got older, because when we're young, our relationship with our parents becomes the foundation for how we view the world around us and ultimately God as well. And so growing up, I just didn't have that stability. I did when I was with my dad. When I was with my dad, we would, spend a lot of time in nature. We would go to the mountains a lot. We would just have a lot of fun together. And when I would come home to my mom, unfortunately, she tried the best that she could with what she had, but she didn't have God with her, and she was struggling mentally. And so she tried and she had good intentions, but unfortunately that environment growing up was just very inconsistent, challenging. There was a lot of verbal abuse as well. She never physically abused me, but there was a lot of verbal abuse of her, just saying really mean things to me, putting me down about my intelligence, about, being selfish, about just all sorts of different stuff that she would say, particularly when she was drinking. And so growing up, I had a huge temptation of the spirit of fantasy, because I wanted to get away from the pain that I was experiencing as a child. And on the other side, talking with my dad about things like aliens and, things like that, I was very interested in what else was out there, and especially with also seeing ghosts, which would really freak me out and really scare me. But on the flip side, there was this temptation to fall into a spirit of fantasy at a really young age. And so I absolutely loved any sort of movie or cartoon or toy that I could play with that was related to fairies, unicorns, witches, mermaids. I absolutely loved all of that. And I remember at a really young age believing that I was a witch. I remember really wanting to have superpowers. And I remember at that time, at a really young age, feeling like that was the thing that was going to give me some sort of sense of control over what was going on in my life. Because if I could just escape the world that I was in and the pain that I was experiencing in the household I was living in, then I could feel a little bit free. I could feel like I could be a kid a little bit, because I felt like I had to grow up really fast in the environment that I was in. And as that continued on, as I got older, my stepdad came into my life. And my stepdad as well, he did the best he could with what he had, but I don't really know what his childhood was like a whole lot. But he also struggled with alcoholism, and my mom and my stepdad together, they were very unhealthy together. There was a lot of fighting in that household. There was a lot of abuse that my stepdad put my mom through. And my mom was always kind of telling me everything that was going on. Things that a little girl should have no business knowing, I ended up kind of being like her therapist in a lot of ways, which I think happens to a lot of people in situations like this. They end up being like the therapist for their parents if their parents aren't super stable mentally. And so I knew a lot that I just shouldn't have known about their relationship. And it caused me to get really angry with my stepdad. And I just continued growing up feeling like, I would come back from my dad's house, which was great. And then I would be in this crazy environment where I didn't know if things were going to get thrown across the room, if screaming and yelling and drinking was going to be happening, or if everything was just going to be fine. And eventually this hit a threshold that was really, really traumatic for me. So when I think I was 11, maybe 12, maybe 10, somewhere around there, my stepdad had threatened to kill my mom and I. And he was completely blackout drunk. Like, he had no idea what he was doing when he did this. My mom was also blacked out drunk when this happened. And I remember this moment where, praise God, my dad had given me a cell phone at a young age, because I was able to call the police, and they were coming. We were out in my stepdad's beach house, which was very, very isolated. There wasn't really anybody around except for a couple neighbors. And I called the police. They were on their way. And my stepdad was trying to like bang the door open, and he kept on screaming, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." And my mom was saying, "I have my daughter in here. What are you like saying?" And him very distinctly saying, "I don't care about your daughter. I'm going to kill her too." And this was so traumatic. I really felt like after this happened, I was just completely changed. I was a different person after that night. But what I remember very distinctly was there was this moment where my mom was telling me that he's going to go get the gun. And I didn't know that they had a gun in the shed somewhere outside, but he was going to get the gun. And all of a sudden, there was this huge boom, and he had gotten knocked out, and he was unconscious for the rest of the night. And I know now that that was the hand of God protecting us. And I honestly don't know if I would still be alive today if that hadn't happened. And I know without any doubt in my mind that God was the one who knocked him out for the rest of the night. He didn't wake up again until the next morning. And the neighbors came, they got us out, the police came, all of this stuff. And after that happened, like I said before, I was just a completely different person. Like, I felt like my innocence had been stolen, and I didn't see the world the same way anymore. And I couldn't look away from the reality of what had happened. So I knew that I wasn't safe. I didn't feel safe at all in that home anymore after that point. And my mom stayed, which happens all the time in abusive relationships, and so that's just the reality of what happens in those situations sometimes. But she stayed, and I was so angry. And every time that they would drink, I would get so angry with them. And at this point, I was really feeling like I needed to escape. I needed to find some way to escape the darkness that I was living in every day. And at that point, I just kind of shut off my heart in a lot of ways. And fast forward a couple years, I was in middle school, and I was like 13, and I remember very distinctly this moment where I had, I started to meet people who were smoking weed, who were experimenting with drugs, and I very distinctly remember just making this decision of like, I would like to experience different realities than the one that I'm living in, because the one I'm living in right now kind of sucks. And I started experimenting with weed. And when I did that, I didn't stop. I ended up smoking every day for every single day for 12 years of my life from that point forward. I was heavily addicted very quickly. And quickly after that, I started experimenting with mushrooms and other things as well. And this was my way of escaping reality. And at that time, I also, there was a lot of self-harm involved in my life at that time. I was very suicidal. I would fantasize about leaving this world all the time. I felt like I didn't belong here. And I just felt completely trapped in the home that I was in. It was a really, really dark time, my teenage years. And at that time, experimenting with psychedelics and things, I really started to open my mind up to like new agey type of thought, where I felt like everything was connected. I felt like, I was breaking out of the matrix when I would take these different psychedelics. I felt like I was seeing something more, but I didn't really have the language for it. I didn't have the new age language for it at all. And I just didn't understand what was happening. But I continued to, experiment with drugs. I struggled a lot with self-hatred. I remember for pretty much all of my teenage years just waking up and saying that I wanted to die and that I hated myself. And I spoke those word curses into my life, into my own life. And it made things so much worse. And as I continued on, there was a little period where my mom and my stepdad had split up. We moved into another house for about a year. And at that time, when my mom and I were living alone together, her drinking got a lot worse and my drug usage also got a lot worse. And so our relationship got really, really bad. There was screaming, there was fighting all the time. I was constantly doing whatever I could to kind of sneak out or do, just be a rebellious teenager. And then eventually she moved back in with my stepdad back into the same house again. And at that point, I was just even more angry. I wanted nothing to do with him. I barely spoke to him. I made it very clear that he was not my father, that he meant nothing to me. And I just had so much anger in my heart. I had so much pain and hardness in my heart. I mean, I was just like a rock of a person at that time. And maybe it wasn't super obvious on the outside, but people who knew me, knew that that's kind of what was going on underneath the surface. And it was really hard. My teenage years were very, very dark, very, very hard. It seemed like everyone around me was also struggling as well with depression and things. And I also had started, exploring sexually at a really young age. I think that also comes from, the dreams that I was having as a young age and just the societal, things that were going on at that time at my school. Like, people were talking about it all the time. So I just thought that that's what everyone was doing and that's what I had to do. And all of these things were just opening demonic door after demonic door. A lot of the times we just think, oh yeah, this is just your rebellious teenage years, whatever. But these open spiritual doors for the demonic to come in. When you come into agreement with these kinds of sins, it opens doors for deeper sin to come in, for deeper demonic strongholds to come in. And as that progressed, as I started to get older, when I was 17, a few things happened that changed my life forever. And so when I was 17, my boyfriend and I at the time, we had found this video on YouTube called, I think it was something called The Secret History of Mankind. and it was talking about like Atlantis and Lemuria and Christ consciousness and all of these new age things. And side story, this movie was from the YouTube channel Spirit Science, and Stephen Bancars, if you haven't looked him up, he's actually a Christian now. He was involved in Spirit Science for a while, and now he's a Christian. And so just crazy little way that all of this comes together. But I watched that video. It was like an hour and a half long, and it just like blew my mind. Like I was like, I'm finding out the truth. I had this huge fascination with crystals and with the pyramids in Egypt. I was constantly watching that TV show, Ancient Aliens. I don't know if you guys remember that one. I was watching that all the time, you know, smoking weed, watching trippy stuff on TV. And this video just felt like it was speaking to something that I felt like I was always feeling like there was something more. And this was feeding that something more. It was giving me false spiritual food, because we always know that there's something more because we're spiritual beings. God made us to be spiritual. And so we have a natural yearning to find God. And if we don't find God, we're going to find it in something else. One other thing that I didn't mention was that I had a short season of life when I was like 8 years old where I did start going to Mormon church. I had a best friend who was Mormon, and I would go to church with her on Sundays. And I stopped going because they weren't giving me good answers to my questions. Like I would ask them stuff and they would just say, oh, well, that's because the Bible says so, and not really go any deeper into it. And so I stopped going, and then I just went straight into my rebellious teenage years like I'm talking about now. But I want to share that because if a church does not give solid answers, and of course, like Mormonism is a false doctrine. Go into that rabbit hole on your own in separate videos if you need to, but it's a false doctrine. It's not true Christianity. I'll just say that. And when you don't get the real spiritual food in a church, you're going to look for it in the occult. And that's exactly what happened to me. So when I found this YouTube video when I was 17 about Atlantis and Lemuria and Christ consciousness and crystals and meditation and all of this different stuff, I was hooked. I was so interested. And my boyfriend and I at the time, we started experimenting with crystals. We were like putting crystals on our chakras and meditating and trying to like activate our chakras and all of this sort of stuff. Mind you, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just playing around and experimenting with these things and trying to open our minds. And what happened right around that same time was it changed my life forever. It's the most traumatic thing I've ever been through. My mom ended up taking her own life about 3 months before I graduated high school. And when this happened, just like what I shared before with, you know, the thing that happened with my stepdad, it completely changed me, and my whole world was just completely shattered. And it was complicated, and I want to speak to this a little bit because I don't think that a lot of people talk about this sort of thing. And I know that there's other people out there who have had really complex experiences with the death of a loved one, and particularly the death of someone who also was abusive to you and caused a lot of pain in your life. Because when someone who was abusive to you ends up dying, it also can feel like the war is finally over. And I can't say that I was happy that my mom died. Of course not. I wasn't happy about it. But there was a sense of feeling like, okay, all of the chaos, all of the hatred, all of the fighting, all of the turmoil, all of the pain that I was experiencing for my entire life was over. And it was really, really weird. It was really, really weird to go through that because on one hand, I was completely broken. I cried for months and was just not the same person anymore after that happened. But then at the same time, I no longer had to live in the abusive home that I was growing up in, that was full of drinking and chaos and fighting and just never knowing what was going to happen next. All of the drama that I was wrapped up in all of the time, all of that was over. And so I was happy that that was over in some way. But also I was completely devastated that my mom was gone, and realizing that, now you have to live the rest of your life without your own mother at such a young age was just absolutely horrific. And mind you, she had taken her own life, but I was also fantasizing about taking my own life for years at this point. And so that only made my own depression a lot worse. And at that point, I kind of tried to just do whatever I could to live a normal life. So I was going to college. I had a job. I was watching, we had a dog that was at my stepdad's house, and that dog was kind of like my mom and I's dog. And so I would go to that house whenever I had a free moment between, if I wasn't working or going to college, I was going to that house and just hanging out with that dog, because my stepdad worked really, really long hours. And so the dog was just home alone all the time if I wasn't there. And so that was kind of what my life looked like at that point. My dad and I moved in a house together in my hometown, really close to where my stepdad's house was. Now, something that happened a week or two after my mom died was I had a supernatural experience where a demonic entity tried to reach out to me, pretending that it was my mom. So what happened was I was at the house with my dog at my stepdad's house, where everything had happened. And my mom's phone was turned off and in a safe. So there was no way that anybody was using that phone or anything like that. And that phone, my mom's phone, her cell phone, called the landline at that house. I saw the phone ringing, I looked at it, and I saw it was my mom's phone number. And I answered the phone, and all I heard was like that white noise sound that people talk about, like when they try to contact ghosts and stuff, they'll play a white noise sound in the background. That was all I heard on the phone. And I just got chills throughout my whole body. I was so freaked out, and I hung up the phone and pretty much just left the house immediately. I was just so freaked out. But what happened when I experienced that was it opened a door for me to think about the possibility of maybe my mom's trying to reach out to me. And I didn't immediately go and seek a medium or anything like that, but it planted a seed, a demonic seed into my mind that my mom could be trying to communicate with me. And we know that that's not true. That's not biblical. That's not the truth about how God constructed reality. And when we experience things like that, it's a demon that's trying to contact you and is preying on your trauma, on the pain of missing that person who was passed, and they're trying to reach you through preying on that trauma. And so that happened, and I kind of just continued on my life. I was working, doing all the things, just trying to be like a normal young adult, which I didn't really even know what that meant. It was really, really a weird time. And I also started to experience a lot of toxicity in my relationships. In my current relationship with my boyfriend that I had at that time, it was really unhealthy. We were both just like verbally and physically abusive to each other, drinking a lot, just really like getting into some bad stuff. And I just noticed like a theme of that continuing on. The next relationship that I had after that was the same kind of way, where it was just a lot of drinking, a lot of yelling, a lot of fighting, and it was not healthy whatsoever. And I Also at that time, I was working at a crystal shop. That was my first job, was working at a crystal shop. And so I got exposed to a lot of New Age sort of theology with the clientele that was coming there. So I would get different ideas about like, oh, well, you can do this with that crystal, and you can meditate in this way with this specific crystal, and oh, have you heard about grounding? Oh, you need to clear your chakras, and all of these different things. I just started to learn that while I was in that store. And so one of the things that I started doing was I started sleeping with a particular crystal under my pillow, because I wanted to start like astral projecting and like experiencing all of this stuff, lucid dreaming and everything. And I started to get really, really attached to different crystals from doing this. And I also was opening a lot of doors to even more demonic dreams, sleep paralysis, all sorts of crazy stuff just continued to go on in my sleep. And so that was happening. And in this season of my life, the anger that I had and the self-hatred that I had, the depression, all of it, it just grew more and more and more. I remember being so paranoid about everything in my life. I felt like everybody was out to get me, that everybody would betray me, that I was just such a horrible person. And I was constantly, word cursing myself about these things over and over and over again. And as that continued on, I was really declining in my own mental health. At this point, I had moved out into my own house. I was living on my own, and I was working. I was doing a door-to-door sales job at that time. I also was living off of savings from an inheritance that I got from my mom. And I was just plummeting in my mental health. It got to a point where I realized that I needed to stop working because I couldn't function. The self-hatred had just completely destroyed me from the inside out. And the toxicity in that particular relationship I was in at that time was so horrendous that I couldn't handle it anymore. And I quit my job and I just started living on my savings. And I started to, I kind of hit this point where I knew that if I continued to move on the trajectory that I was on, I wasn't going to live much longer. I knew that eventually I would take my life if I kept on going down the road that I was going down. And I knew that I needed to, slow down on the drug use. I knew that I needed to change in some way and start healing, but I didn't know how. Again, I didn't have any religious background or knowledge about any of that. All I knew was those little seeds of the occult that had been planted from, working with crystals and hearing about some very lighthearted kind of New Age stuff when I was working at that crystal shop. But when I hit that point in my life and I quit that current job that I had, I literally just started looking up online, how do I heal myself? And as I was searching on the good old rabbit hole of the internet, I started to find this group and this guy that was doing a bunch of personal development stuff. If you've heard of Tony Robbins, think that sort of style of personal development. And so I started watching this guy's YouTube channel pretty much every day. And it was a whole bunch of just motivational stuff that was starting to bring me out of the hole I was in, because at this point, I was not leaving my house for weeks. I was living off of DoorDash. I was not speaking to people for a week, maybe 2 weeks on end. I was in a hole, and I needed to desperately get out of it. And I realized that I needed to do whatever I could to get myself out of the little life that I had built for myself and get into a completely different environment, because everybody that I was around at that time they were all just in the same sort of little rut that I was in, maybe to lesser or more so degrees than me, of course, but it's just the same kind of people doing the same old stuff with the same old mindset, as everybody else that I knew. And I realized I needed to get out of that. And so I kept on watching this guy's YouTube videos, and he had an event that was taking place in Utah. And it was like a 4-day event, and it was like your classic sort of like Tony Robbins style seminar where people are, you know, rah, jumpy around, like doing a bunch of, you know, personal development, belief system, healing sort of stuff. And it looked really cool to me. And I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. I think I'm going to do it. And so I decided to drive across the country. I was living in Washington. That's where I grew up. And so I drove from Washington to Utah all by myself to this 4-day seminar. And this was a huge thing for me because I was really, really afraid at this time of doing anything alone. Even though I was alone all the time, I was just in my house. And so driving all the way across the country, I was totally breaking out of my comfort zone. And when I went to that seminar, I learned all about, you know, breaking through your belief systems and, you know, like just successful mindsets and all of the things that you learn in that sort of seminar. But what was interesting, and the reason why I think that this happened, was because I had already opened doors to the occult through the sin in my life, the demonic dreams that were happening, the crystals, all of the different little like ideas that I had about New Age and Atlantis and the pyramids and all of this different stuff. I had opened those doors. And so now when I went to this event, even though there was like maybe 400 people at this event from all different sorts of walks of life, I just like a magnet got drawn to the New Age people that were there. And I got introduced to a handful of people. There was one woman that was there who we had sort of like gotten all together to hang out at one of the person's like hotel rooms. It was like a group of like maybe 20 of us that were there that were in the seminar, but we just had like an after party sort of thing. And this girl, she kind of like stood up and started talking about like Atlantis and how we all have past lives in Atlantis. And that's why we're all here together now, is to like continue the work that we had started at Atlantis and Lemuria and Christ consciousness. She just said like all of the trigger words. She said all the things. And I had sort of at this point like not really been thinking about any of that stuff for a few years, because that season of my life was just so heavy and dark that I wasn't even thinking about it. But when she said it, it was like these like alarms started going off in my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like super important. And so I connected really deeply with her and another guy. Let's call him Dan, because Dan ended up being a really big part of my New Age journey. All of them did that I met there, but I met Dan and we hit it off really well. I went back to Washington, and he happened to be going back to Washington as well at that time. He wasn't from Washington, but he was just there visiting friends or something like that. And we ended up back there at the same time. And so he invited me to come down with him from Washington to California to go to Lightning in a Bottle Festival, and also get a sound bath from the girl who was at that event talking about Atlantis and Lemuria and all of that. And, you know, when I came back, I was like, I felt like I had changed in a way that I wanted to keep going that direction, because this was the first time I felt like I was breaking out of the depression that I had experienced. You know, I was starting to be positive about the way I was viewing myself. I was starting to see some hope in my life. And when I came back from that seminar, just back to my house, and I was just like, I can't just do all of that and then just go back to my old life. Like, I have to keep pursuing this. And at this point, I had really, decided that I was going to dedicate my whole being, my whole life into healing myself. And that was really like the catalyst that sent me really, really deep into the New Age. And so when I went on this road trip, I decided to go on this road trip with who we're calling Dan. That's not his actual name. Just want to keep them anonymous. But we went down there, and this was my first time like being in the Hollywood sort of scene, and there was so much that happened in that few weeks of time that I was down in California with those guys. The people that I met, the opportunities that were happening. I started learning about manifestation. I watched The Secret. I started learning about tarot cards. I started learning about, frequencies and vibrations and all of this different stuff. I started to get really, really deep into all of that because the people I was with like Dan and a group, maybe like 8 of us. And they were all really, really deeply involved in the occult. And they were teaching me all of these things and the things I was seeing. And there was just all sorts of crazy stuff going on. Like if I were to describe to you all the details that took place in those few weeks of time, it would take me like another hour to explain all of that. So I can't go through all of that right now. But I started to see the power of manifestation, and I'm using that in quotation marks because it has nothing on the power of God. God's power is so much stronger than any sort of power that we can experience in the occult, including manifestation. But I did start to see different things happen. And it was very interesting because I ended up, there were different things that I was invited to where I was in the room with like multimillionaires and billionaires who owned, nonprofit organizations or different hotel chains or all sorts of different things like that. And I was sitting there like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I in this room right now? How did I get here? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And what I know now that I didn't know at the time is that there is a huge correlation between the elitists in this world and the occult. And that's a whole rabbit hole to go in on your own, but that is something that I didn't really understand at that time. I was like, how is this happening? How am I getting in these rooms with these people, and how is all of this going on? And I continued to travel with these people. Eventually that led me to get a coach. I worked with a coach for a year, and inside of that coaching package, I also got to go to 5 retreats. Dan was also a part of this coaching program, and so we were going to a lot of the same retreats, which led us to just start traveling around together. Mind you, I had just met this person, but we had like connected in this way, and he seemed to be so advanced spiritually. We also bonded because both of our parents had died, so both of our moms had died, and we kind of were on like a similar journey in that way. And so I very quickly looked up to him as sort of like a spiritual mentor in a lot of ways. But I also was seeing a lot of like red flags where there was like a lot of trauma that he had been through in his life that was really influencing the way that he would treat people. So sometimes it would just be totally fine. Everything's great. Everything's amazing. He's like, doing all these awesome things for people, encouraging random people that we meet when we're traveling. Like even like the waitress at a diner, he does this whole like coaching thing for this person and like activates their gifts and does all this like stuff. And so it would like pendulum swing from like really, really high highs to really, really low lows, where then he would just blow up on people and like leave. And so I saw that, but I didn't really see it fully. And I kept on, traveling with him. We went, we did a mastermind at sea cruise. We did another retreat in Utah, Bali, just all over the place we were traveling. And at this point, I eventually, I was traveling so much that I ended up selling pretty much all of my stuff and just becoming a full-blown New Age nomad. And one of the interesting things that started to happen in this year of my life was two of the other people that we were traveling with. I won't share their exact names, but I will say that they rejected their human names at this point in their life. I don't know where they're at with this now. I don't speak with them now. But they were claiming that one of them was Lucifer. For short, he went by Lucy. And the other one was Lilith. And so they were going by Lucifer and Lilith. And this guy, Dan, that I was traveling with as well, he believed that he was the Greek god Pan. And so I had Lucifer, Lilith, and Pan that I was traveling with. And it was so interesting because, we would have these experiences where we would take these psychedelics and they would sort of like shapeshift into these entities and start to have like a spiritual sort of like showdown. At least that's the way that I was seeing it from the outside. Only God knows what was really going on. From what I was seeing, now through a Christian lens, they were just allowing themselves to be possessed by these demons. And I was kind of over here just like having fun. Like I wasn't really trying to do anything super crazy when I was taking these psychedelics. I still kind of had like the party mindset that I had as a teenager with those things. And they started to tell me things like, oh, you're always just fluttering around like a fairy. Why aren't you stepping into your goddess? When are you going to become a goddess? And they kept challenging me with my identity and trying to tell me like, you're not really Mia, you're a goddess and you need to claim your goddess. And Dan was always telling me that, you're really Athena, you're really Gaia, you're really these different feminine goddesses. And you need to reject the name Mia and start going by these other names. And I always thought that this was so weird. It really, really messed with my head for a while because I felt like these were the people who were like initiating me into the occult. And so they were teaching me manifestation and tarot readings and like tapping into the psychic field and activating my psychic gifts. And they were teaching me all of this stuff. And so I thought that they were, that they knew better. And so I felt really challenged when they would share these things and tell me these things. But there was also this sense in me, which I think was truly God's protection of just giving me discernment about the situation of like, I don't need to do that. Like, I don't need to go there. And I always felt like it was very sad that they were rejecting their own humanity. Like there were times where, someone would call them by the name that they were actually born with, and they would like scoff at their own human name because they believed that they were something higher than just being a human being. They believed that they were their own gods. And that was the whole thing that I was learning, was that I'm actually God and I'm actually, creating all of this, that I'm creating my reality. And so I was kind of like going into all of that and believing that. But this whole idea of like, I need to reject my human name as Mia and take on like this deity as a part of my identity was really, really weird to me. And I had another friend, really awesome friend. If you're watching this, you know who you are, who, we had this moment where they were all doing their Lucifer, Lilith, Pan sort of thing during this one particular psychedelic journey. And my friend was with me, and him and I were just, hanging out under the stars. And he was like, it doesn't have to be that serious. Like, you don't have to get into that with them. Like, let them do whatever they're doing. You don't need to do that. And that was really helpful for me at that time because I felt like I was the youngest one there. I was also the newest to all of this stuff. And so I felt like maybe I'm just not understanding what's going on here, and maybe I need to, get with the program or something. And this friend just was like, no, like, I'm not about what they're doing here either. Like, don't worry about it. And so that was really, really helpful for me. And as this progressed forward, eventually, there was a lot of traveling, a lot of things happening. I'm condensing this as much as I can because this is a long story. But eventually, Dan and I got into a relationship. It was the weirdest relationship I've ever experienced in my life. And I say that because there wasn't like an affection and a love there that you normally have in a relationship. And I think a lot of that was because he was also sort of like my spiritual mentor at this time. And I was very much so like under the control of him in that way. We were in Costa Rica when this started, and then we traveled to good old Lake Atitlan. If you are a New Ager, you've probably heard of it or maybe been there before. Basically, this is like a huge New Age hub. And in this New Age hub, it is basically like a little world of worlds inside of itself, where it's this tiny little town on a lake. The town is called San Marcos. And once you enter this town, there is nothing but hippies and New Agers there. Every single conceivable New Age modality that you want to learn, you can learn there. All of the plant medicine, all of the different things are happening there. It's like this huge hub. There's partying, there's all sorts of stuff now that was happening there. And so we went there and we joined a circus school that was taking place there. We were there for, I think, 6 weeks. And it was very, very interesting at that time because, we were in this new relationship. I was kind of getting pressured into doing, and of course this was also, my own choice to do it because I thought that this was the way to do conscious relationships, but there was a lot of polyamory happening around. Dan wanted us to be polyamorous. I wasn't so sure, but I also knew that I kind of just had to go along with it because he was sort of like the spiritual authority, and that if I wasn't going along with what he wanted, it was like I wasn't evolved enough, I wasn't open enough to be polyamorous, all of this different stuff, which is a super common thing in New Age spaces, this idea that if you're wanting to be monogamous, it's because you're not open enough or you're not spiritual enough. So that's basically what was going on there. And at this time, we had been introduced to this couple. I won't share their names. They were in Costa Rica, so we met them before we came to Guatemala. And they were just like on a whole other level of like psychic ability and different things like that. And we were learning from them at this time. And I was doing this course with her that was all around like opening my psychic abilities even more. And at this time, I also experimented with what's called Bufo. It's 5-MeO-DMT. It's what some people say is like the strongest psychedelic out there. And when I tried this psychedelic, I was completely changed after I did this, and not in a good way. It opened my psychic field up. It opened that door like completely wide open. Like there wasn't even a door anymore. It completely just like blasted that open to the point where I was so overwhelmed and overstimulated being around people after that point that I felt like I was feeling everybody's thoughts. Like I could see things before they were going to happen. There was just so many different abilities that were opening up for me at this time. To the point where it just felt really unstable, to be honest. it was really overwhelming to be around people at that time after I did that. And another thing that had happened at that time, because this sort of season of my life was all about like just going even deeper. I had jumped off the deep end when I started traveling with Dan. And now I was like digging into the trenches of like, like I was going so deep into New Age at this point. And I had received a reading from this woman in Costa Rica who I was also doing the course with. And she was telling me that I was a starseed and that I was connected to all of these different alien lifetimes, that I was like a nomadic alien who had traveled very far to get to planet Earth. And it kind of affirmed some other things that I had believed about myself even before that point. And so I started connecting with different alien spirit guides. There's different areas in the world where there has been a demonic territory that's been given to these different entities, and Lake Atitlan is definitely one of those places. I'm not sure if that's because of the human sacrifice that has happened in, the Mayan cultures for, thousands of years, way before, or more so potentially because it's also a place for New Agers to do all of their ceremonies and rituals and call upon all of these different entities and things. Probably a combination of the two. But in that particular area, there is a lot of demonic activity related to aliens, quote unquote. And I was having these psychic experiences where I would go into a trance and communicate with these entities that were claiming to be beings of light. And I would allow them to work psychically on my body. I would go into these weird dreams where they would be like working on me through the night. And I was just really opening up psychically to all of these different abilities. It started to get to a point where, I would be able to like see where somebody was, or I just had all these different like abilities that were opening up. So I felt like I was becoming super powerful, while simultaneously feeling like I was under the authority of this guy, Dan, who had been doing this stuff for a lot longer than me, was seemingly more knowledgeable and more confident than me. I had still, struggled a lot with my own self-doubt, my own self-hatred. I was still struggling with that on some level. And so I felt a lot more comfortable just kind of following along with what this guy was teaching. And at that time, what was also very interesting, and this is where you can really start to see the hand of God taking all of this and turning it around for good. Because when I was in Guatemala, the man who is now my husband was also in Guatemala. And we didn't meet at that time yet, but we met the same people. And so that was what later on led to us meeting. So we had met two people. I'll call them Bob and Mary. And my husband had also met Bob and Mary on his own accord at that same time. Now, my husband and I didn't meet each other, but we met Bob and Mary. And now Bob and Mary were both, really incredible coaches, incredible, New Age facilitators and things like that. And Mary had this vision for this New Age community that she wanted to create that was all around doing your inner work, healing your trauma, all of that good stuff. And eventually Bob and Mary decided to come together to create this New Age community. Now, my husband became a part of that community, and Dan and I became a part of that community. It was around the time of COVID that this started, so it was pretty much all online at this time. And it was people all around the world. I think there was hundreds of people that ended up being a part of it. And so my husband was a part of it he's from Europe. And so he was in Europe doing this program and being on the same Zoom calls as me and all of that. And then Dan and I were on the same Zoom calls and stuff and all of that and everything. And so life continued on. I was continuing to do all of the New Age things. COVID happened, and so Dan and I moved into a house back in Washington that was very, very weird. And at this time in my life, it started to become apparent to me because I realized that Dan had told me that he learned how to do black magic. And I started to realize that he was probably doing black magic on me. And now, from a Christian lens, I will say there's no such thing as good or bad magic or light magic or black magic. It's all demonic. It's all black magic. And so it didn't really matter that he had learned this, but this at least made me aware that he was putting spells on me and he was cursing me and doing different things like this. Now, at this point, I really felt like everything was just working against me in that house, and like I was constantly getting in trouble for doing the wrong spiritual thing, for not doing the work properly, for not having my energy centered the correct way. Like Dan was just really like criticizing me for almost everything that I was doing, and I was just getting like punished for that all the time. And so that season of my life, I started to become aware that I needed to get away from this guy, but I also was so heavily dependent on him for any sort of like validation about how reality was working, because what happens when you're in the New Age is you become committed to being so open-minded that truth becomes completely subjective. There's no absolute reality that you're anchored into anymore. You're just completely floating around in whatever subjective truth you want to subscribe to at that time, because you're creating your reality based on your beliefs. And so it's all about what you believe and what you want to create. And I had become so dissociated from reality, from that belief system, that at this point I was just like trying to cling on to anything that seemed solid, and he was the only thing that seemed solid in this really weird, twisted way. And so I gave him a lot of authority over my life and over the way that I chose to perceive the world and what I was supposed to be doing in the world and all of this sort of stuff. And so it became apparent to me that I needed to get away. And so I decided to travel back to Lake Atitlan. Perfect little place for my New Age self to run away to. And I decided to do my yoga teacher training there, and pretty much just left everything behind and just, was trying to get away from Dan. But that didn't really last very long because I was so codependent on him at the same time that it was just not... It wasn't really going to work for me to get away and actually stay away. And he ended up coming down to Lake Atitlan as well. At the end of my yoga teacher training, he ended up proposing to me. And I said yes. It was really weird because I didn't really feel super happy about it. And at the same time, I started taking ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is a very, very demonic psychedelic. I can't even call it a plant medicine because it's just, you can really see, like, and even back then when I would do it, I would see the demons coming in to people and jumping around the room. And so when I started taking ayahuasca, on one hand, it has to give you a false sense of healing. That's how all of these things work in the New Age, because if you did something and it just completely tormented you and then you just came out on the other side like, wow, that was horrible, you would never do that again. And so the same happens with Reiki, with sound healing, with psychedelics, with all of it. You get this false sense of healing, and you get this idea that you've done some sort of like profound healing work in these different ceremonies and things. But the truth is that you're exchanging a false sense of healing for a part of your soul. And this is very clearly what was happening for me. I would have these experiences where, I felt like I was learning something so profound about my life, or that I was healing all of these different things. And something very interesting was that I remember in my first ayahuasca ceremony, I saw my heart, and my heart was like rotten and dead. And now keep in mind, like, I'll share the Christian lens for this and the counterfeit of this, but I saw my dead heart in this ayahuasca ceremony, and the ayahuasca spirit was telling me to give it my heart. And so I gave it my heart, and then it like took my heart and like transformed it into this beautiful new heart that was like totally like rejuvenated and revitalized. Now, there is a scripture in Isaiah, or maybe it's Ezekiel, I'll put it in the screen at the bottom, that says that you can pray for God to remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. So the demonic realm knows scripture, and the demonic realm will counterfeit scripture all the time. And this is just one of many examples of how this happened in my life, where this ayahuasca spirit pretended to give me a heart of flesh and remove my heart of stone, but it was giving me a false sense of healing. It did not actually heal my heart. And I can testify to that because after this ayahuasca ceremony, I was becoming so suicidal. The suicidal tendencies that I had in my teenage years had kind of died away when I started to get into personal development and get coaching and get help and all of that. And I started to kind of turn away from those feelings. But after I started doing ayahuasca, it came back so much stronger. This spirit of hopelessness and just complete utter apathy and despair started to flood into my life again. And I hadn't really been feeling that so much, again, because I think that the New Age really gives you a false sense of healing so that you come deeper and deeper into agreement with its principles so that the devil can just have a bigger stronghold over your life and continue to oppress you further and further. And so I hadn't really been experiencing that, but I think that was because the New Age just gave me a false sense of healing. But when I started taking ayahuasca, this just flooded back into me, and I was really, really, really struggling. And also, mind you, I'm about to get married. And so usually when you are about to get married, you are supposed to be really happy and excited for your life, like a new life is about to begin. I didn't have any of that. There was no honeymoon type joy that you get in the beginning of a relationship or when you're about to get married. I had none of that with Dan. It was really just a lot of heaviness, a lot of continuing to be punished for not doing the right spiritual things, for not having my energy centered in the right way. There was just a lot of pressure for me to continue to heal and a lot of confusion with the different psychedelics that we were taking with ayahuasca and things like that. And now a couple months later, we're still in Guatemala at this point. We ended up having the wedding, and there is something so incredible that God did with this. And I only can share this with you now because I had this woman tell me this like maybe about a year ago, but I didn't know, of course, that this was happening in the background. So when we had this wedding, we had a full-blown like Mayan shamanic wedding because we were in Guatemala, and so we wanted to like incorporate the rituals of the area that we were in. And mind you, we really had no idea what that meant. Like, we had no idea the implications of that. It ended up being like a 4-hour ritual that had all of these different like components that were moving in it and everything. And there was a woman there who, my good friend, his sister was coming. And this woman, she didn't know Dan and I. She didn't know us at all. She was just my good friend's sister, and she's a Christian. This good friend of mine too, he's Christian too. I think that he has kind of gone into New Age as well, but his sister has stayed very, very strong in her faith, and she is very spiritually gifted. She definitely has the discernment of spirits, and that is an incredible gift to have. And so she went to this, to Guatemala. She wasn't originally even planning to come to the wedding. She just wanted to go there to get cheap dental work done. And she had it scheduled to have her dental work done on the day of the wedding. But like a day or two before, that appointment got canceled. And so she had nowhere to go that day. So she asked if she could join the wedding. She felt like God was telling her, like, you're supposed to be there. And mind you, she did not want to go. She knew that it would be a demonic thing. She knew she did not want to go there. She knew it was going to be demonic and dark. But God was telling her to go. And mind you, she didn't know Dan and I. So she's fully just in submission to God by doing this. And we say yes. She comes to the wedding, and I'm going to share what happened from her perspective on that wedding day. So she got there, and we were in this sort of like cave type place that had it was like an old Mayan ceremonial site, and the shamans were doing their thing. And the whole time that she was there, she was praying to Jesus to bring a bubble of protection like around this space, and to just protect me and Dan, and just like protect us. And she could see at the very top of this cave, because it was kind of like an open like cave type thing, and at the top of this rock structure, basically, she could see this demon that was supposed to be in the ceremony that wasn't able to go down there because Jesus's presence was in the ceremony, because she was praying for us. She was fervently praying for us that entire time. And she was feeling like this battle going on in the spirit, that this demon was so mad that he couldn't get down there. But the presence of the Lord is more powerful than any demonic entity, regardless of that, that was his territory. It didn't matter, because Jesus has the highest authority in the spiritual realm, you guys. And she kept on praying and praying and praying, and this demon couldn't get down, but the pressure was like building. And it got to this point where they handed all of the guests basically like a piece of Palo Santo to throw into the fire as like an intention for the newlyweds. And she told me that she didn't really know what the word intention meant, but she kind of attributed it to like a blessing. And so she was praying to Jesus. She was asking Jesus, like, what do you want me to bless or pray for this woman? And she very clearly heard the word of God tell her, pray for her to be set free. And I just get chills even thinking about that, because she had no idea the depth of spiritual oppression that I was under at that time. There are things that people have told me about this particular season of my life that I said or that I did, and I don't remember it, because I truly believed I was possessed at this point. I was in so much darkness and in such spiritual oppression, and in just oppression in that relationship, in this marriage that was about to be happening. And she was very confused that Jesus said that, because she was like, isn't this her wedding day? Isn't this supposed to be like a happy day for her? Like, why does she need to be set free? But she was like, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna pray that. And so she prayed that for me. And if you're a Christian watching this, I just want you to know that your prayers matter. Like, this woman went into full-blown spiritual battle for me, and she didn't even know it. And as the ceremony continued on, there was very particular placements that they were having us in, where in the Mayan, like with the fire, and in the ceremonies with the Mayan shamanism, there's these different like placements and orders of like the way that you're supposed to go around the fire, or the way that you're supposed to like face the fire or not face it, and like the different locations that you're in. And so what I believe is that this is just my own personal belief on it, is that they were doing almost like sigil magic. Now, sigil magic doesn't come directly from Mayan shamanism, but the occult kind of has these like universal principles that are all connected. And whether it's shamanism or, just straight up occultic witchcraft or anything, like there's going to be similarities in the way that it works. And there was very specific placements in the way that they had us stand and face certain directions and move to different positions around the fire. And also the way that they had the people, like all the guests standing around us and everything. And it felt like they were sealing something up in the spiritual realm. And so the ceremony is kind of progressing to its big climax, and we're moving around and we're having to stay in these different like points around the fire and things. And this girl is still praying this entire time. And she's literally just like, at this point, the intensity is growing so much that she is just like whispering, like just under her voice so quietly, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. She's just whispering the name of Jesus. And she felt this pressure, and she was feeling like dizzy, and like all of this pressure was building up. And she heard the Holy Spirit say, "It's okay, just surrender. I've got you. It's going to be okay." And so she surrendered. And when she surrendered to that like intensity that she was feeling, she ended up fainting. And when she fainted, it interrupted what was going on in the spirit in that ceremony, because everything was about to be sealed up. Now, mind you, everything's already interrupted because the demon that's supposed to be involved in the ceremony can't even come down to do the thing that it was supposed to do because of Jesus's presence in that space. And now, because she fainted, I turned around and immediately got up and left and exited the container of the ceremony and went over to her, and everything stopped and we all went over to her. The only people who didn't go over to her were Dan and the shamans, if I remember correctly. And we got her some food, and I looked at her and I was like, look, I know the spiritual energies are really intense right now. I don't remember saying that. Apparently that's what I said. And when I said that, I guess she just knew that God really loved me. And it makes me emotional even thinking about it now, because in the midst of the depth of my rebellion against God, God was still seeking me out and sent one of his warriors to go into battle for me. This woman did not know me. She had never met me before. And yet she was submissive to God's assignment that he sent her on. And it caused her to faint. And she was so mad that had even happened, that, that she had like experienced something like that, because it was such an intense spiritual battle. But what I was able to tell her when she told me this is that she interrupted something in the spirit, because it caused me to get up and come out of agreement, like through me walking and going over to her. It caused me to interrupt and leave what was being sealed in the spirit. It now was broken. And she stopped. Like, she didn't stop it, but Jesus stopped it through her obedience. And this is just such an incredible thing to think about, how God seeks us and protects us and loves us even amidst our rebellion against him. I was rebelling against him. I was deep rebelling against him at this time. And he still protected me. He still sent someone across the world to this crazy demonic wedding ceremony that she had no reason to need to be there, but God sent her there, and she was obedient, and it changed something in the spiritual realm that day. And after that, I continued to struggle. I continued to struggle a lot with my depression and self-hatred and all of that. Our, relationship, I'm not even going to call it a marriage, because God wasn't at the center of it, and that's just not what it was. But I ended up leaving that relationship 3 months after the wedding day. And I honestly believe that a lot of that was because of the prayers that she spoke that day, that she prayed for me to be set free. And me leaving that relationship was the first step in my true spiritual freedom. I got free of the abuse, the spiritual abuse. There was a lot of abuse in that relationship that was going on in the background as well, that I won't get too deep into, but Jesus freed me from that, and I believe it was because she prayed that. And I left that relationship. I ended up going back to Washington and kind of just starting my whole life over again. I ended up getting my own little apartment and living on my own for a year, and just starting to deconstruct what even was that last 2 years that I had with Dan, because there were so many weird things that he was teaching me about, don't be human, be a god, be a goddess, all of this crazy occultic stuff that he was teaching me. I just started to sit back and think, wow, that was actually really, really crazy. and I'm not sure how I feel about all of it. And so I started to just kind of deconstruct it on my own, in my own little apartment, and just kind of come back to myself in that way. And I didn't leave New Age. All I did was trade one form of New Age for another, because I kind of left behind the form of New Age that Dan was teaching me, and I started to reconstruct my own form of spirituality or New Age that worked for me. And so for me, that looked like a lot of getting deeper into tarot readings, getting really into like what sort of taught as like the sacred feminine and nature worship, and working with herbs and crystals and doing rituals related to that, related to the elements and things. And so I just started to get really into like my own sort of form of New Age that was different from what Dan had taught me. And so that year of my life was a lot more calm. I started to just kind of get into my own little spiritual groove. I felt like I was just kind of like this independent witch. I just felt like this independent girly that was like, didn't need a man, didn't need anybody. And a lot of that was because I had just been so hardened from what had happened. It was just the hardenedness of my heart was shifting and taking new forms. And now it was all about being a witch and being a nature worshiper and being just like a cool, independent girl that didn't need anybody. And as I was getting to the end of my lease in my apartment, I was continuing to hear about this little town in Ecuador. And I was hearing about it through Bob and Mary, who had created that New Age community. I had been involved in that community this whole time, doing their facilitator training for coaching, doing their inner work programs and all of this. So I had been deeply involved in this community, and Bob and Mary were living in Ecuador. And so this place had been on my radar for a while now. I had been really wanting to go there for a long time. And when I was getting to the end of my lease, I was thinking, okay, like I could go there or I could stay in Washington. And so at this point, I had a decision to make. I could either leave Washington and take a leap of faith and go to Ecuador. I had always had a dream of living in a different country, and I really felt like this could potentially be the place I would want to live. But I just wasn't totally sure. It was a big leap of faith still, and I was nervous. And I remember distinctly, I made the choice to kind of reach out to something more than just the universe. Because at this point, I felt like the universe was sort of like God, like a lot of New Agers believe. And at this point, rather than calling out to the universe, I actually said the word God. And I just sort of like prayed in a way or spoke out in a way, okay, God, you need to give me a sign. If I need to go to Ecuador, if you want me to go to Ecuador, then you need to give me a really obvious sign. And that day, I really felt like God had used what was significant to me at that point in my life to get my attention. So even amidst my rebellion against him, he was still working in my life and guiding me towards where he wanted me to be. And so I really valued different animals. So I really felt like whenever I saw an animal, it meant something spiritual and significant. And so that day, I saw a bobcat in the back of my apartment. I was sitting in the creek that was in the back of my apartment complex. Mind you, this is in like suburban Washington, where yes, there's a lot of wildlife in Washington, but this was not an area where you would normally see a bobcat. And I saw this bobcat. I was sitting on the ground and I turned around, and this bobcat was like maybe 10 feet away from me. And we just locked eyes, and then he ran away. And to me, that felt like a sign. And later on that day, I had the same sort of experience, but with an owl. And so I had these two signs, owl and bobcat, and it really spoke to me. And God knew that that's what would get my attention. And basically off of that and that alone, I decided to go to Ecuador for 6 months. And I, again, ended my lease, packed up all my stuff, sold a bunch of my stuff, and went back on the nomadic adventure. And I went to go see Bob and Mary and a handful of the other people who were involved in this New Age community. And at the same time that I was going to Ecuador to see Bob and Mary, the man who's now my husband was also coming to Ecuador to see Bob and Mary. And the first day that I got to Ecuador, I met my husband. And this is just how God moves, you guys. Like, even amidst my rebellion, he was sending me where he knew I needed to be. And mind you, my husband's from Europe. Like, we would have never met if this hadn't happened. So this was clearly God's orchestration. And so my husband and I, we started dating, and we were also, we were in Ecuador, we were hanging out with Bob and Mary, and Bob ended up becoming Christian. And it was very interesting to watch. And at this point, I felt very rebellious against Christianity. I did not agree with it. I did not like it. I was very against it. And so I judged Bob quite a lot. And on the other hand, Mary was still very New Age, very into like oneness theology, into, all of that sort of stuff. And so it was interesting to watch the progression of their lives. And I found that it was much easier for me to sit down and have a real conversation with Bob than it was for me to have a real conversation with Mary. And I felt like when I would talk to Mary, it didn't really feel like she was really here. Like, it felt like her eyes were always kind of wandering, or it felt like she wasn't really present with me. It felt like, she was really good at like showing love, but it didn't feel super genuine. And again, I don't put this against her in any sort of way. Like, she's someone who I love dearly and care about very dearly. But when you're in this sort of oneness theology for so long, you just become very dissociated from the world around you. And I believe that that's what was happening with her. And so I judged Bob, but I also watched that, like, I could sit down and have a real conversation with him, and he was much more genuine with me. And there were sort of like principles that he was sharing that were based on Christian morals that actually made a lot of sense to me. And so I just started to watch, these two people who I looked up to for years start to go on different paths. And over a number of months, I was watching the fruit of that sort of transpire in their lives. And, I watched Bob go through an entire transformation in his life where he was like losing everything that he knew in his life, but he was so happy because he had God. He had a relationship with Jesus. And that really struck me. I still judged him for it, but it did stand out to me in a way. So it started to plant a seed. And as the year continued on, I went back to Seattle for a few months, and then I went to Ibiza, which is where my husband was living at that time. So I went to Ibiza to be with him. And at this time, my husband and Bob were having a lot of really deep conversations about Christianity, where they were sending like 30 to 40 minute voice messages back and forth, like debating the theology of all of it. And I would listen to these voice messages too, and I would have all of this resistance in me. I felt so threatened by just like the presence of Christianity in my life. And like even the fear that like maybe my husband, he wasn't my husband yet, but my boyfriend who would later become my husband, that he would become Christian and that everybody would just view me as like this demonic witch and that I would be ostracized in that way. And so I felt threatened by it, but something else was also happening in the background at that time in my life. So there were two things that were happening. One thing that was happening was I was experiencing extremely demonic dreams. Now, these were worse than the dreams that I mentioned before that I was having as a young teenager and as a child. I was experiencing like full-blown demonic attack where there was no denying it in my mind that there was something incredibly dark attacking me in my sleep. What was going on in these dreams is that I would basically, if you've watched the movie Inception, where there's like dreams within dreams within dreams, I was experiencing this layering of dreams where I would wake up in the dream as if I was in my own bedroom. Nothing would be different in the room that would make it apparent to me that I was dreaming. And so I would continue on in my day in the dream, thinking that I was awake. And then I would notice something was off. Like, for example, I would notice that somebody's hair was different. And then I would say like, hey, like, I don't remember you dyeing your hair that way. And then that person starting to like turn and like have this creepy smile and like turn into a demon and attack me. And then I would wake up, but I would still be in another dream, and I would go down a layer deeper into another dream, and the dream would just loop again. And then every time I would realize I was dreaming, I would get attacked and then sent down another layer and another layer and another layer. And it was like impossible for me to get out of it. To the point where when I would finally wake up for real, I didn't know if I was actually awake or not. I would have to like turn on all the lights. I remember even like getting some salt and eating salt just because I needed to taste something to really make sure if I was awake, because the dreams were so vivid. I could feel, I could touch, I could like really, it was a very realistic dream. So it was super hard for me to realize if I was out of it. So that was going on almost every night at this point. It was horrendous. It was so horrible, and I was having such a hard time with it. Now, the other thing that was happening was I was starting to feel very disconnected from people who were in the New Age. People who I loved, people who I still love, people who have been very close with me for a long time. I would go to ecstatic dance, or I would go to a potluck with a bunch of friends, or I would go to a kirtan, or, you know, I would go to these different New Age events, and I just felt like there was an emptiness, like there wasn't actually anything real that was going on around me. And I started to just, I remember many times in that year, I was leaving early. I kept leaving events early, which was not common for me to do. And I felt like there was something missing in these events. Like it wasn't feeding me in the same way that it used to feed me. And I just started to feel like I would try to talk to people and nobody was actually here with me. Like I felt like everybody was kind of, you know, and if you've been in the New Age, you've probably experienced this too, where a lot of people, and they're genuine people and they're amazing people. This isn't anything against them, but the spirit behind it, you know, often moves them to be very out of their bodies, very disconnected. And they'll just kind of be like floating around and, you know, doing all of these movements and these sounds and saying the spiritual lingo, but they're not actually saying anything to you, and they're not actually here with you. They're not actually being present with you. And that was really weird to start experiencing that. So I just started to feel like I wasn't finding my place anymore. And so when I went to Ibiza to be with my husband, that was even weirder because I was in a new place. I didn't really know anybody. And I would go to these New Age events that were just even more superficial than what I was experiencing in Washington. And because if you know anything about Ibiza, there's a lot of like elitist spiritualism kind of going on, where everything's just very superficial. Everybody's dressed in the correct way. Everybody says the right things and acts the right way. And it just felt so fake to me. And I remember particularly this one night that we went to an event, and there was like this fire, and there was some sort of like, I don't even know what it was that they were guiding us through. It was some sort of like manifestation ritual or something, where we were all standing around the fire. There was like probably 100 people there. And the guy was like, you know, had a big microphone and was like, okay, now like put your intention into the fire and like dance your intention out. And like all of these people were just like doing this weird, like sensual dancing. Everyone was dancing the same way, and everyone was dressed all perfect, and everyone was like looking at each other and judging each other, and like just behaving in the way that they felt like they needed to behave in order to be spiritual. And I I was so done with it. I just like wanted none of it. I just kind of was like watching. I just kind of like stood there still in stillness, like looking around at all of this and realizing like, this is a bunch of crap. Like there's not actually anything of substance here. It's filler food. It's not real spiritual food. And all of these people are just like hypnotized into this like matrix. And I just started to kind of see that. And I grabbed my husband and I was like, can we go? Like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so we left, and, you know, we're continuing to have these conversations with Bob about all of these different, you know, New Age concepts, because he was, you know, he ran a New Age community. He was in the New Age for a long time. So he was able to really like dissect the differences of like the way that you view the spiritual world in the New Age compared to like really understanding that there's a demonic kingdom at play, and that there is good and bad, and that there is absolute truth, and that God's truth is the absolute reality that we should be living in accordance with, and that God doesn't have any darkness in him. There's good and there's bad, and they're separate things. And we were just starting to kind of talk about that with Bob, and I was still like judging it and rejecting it a lot, but in the background I was having all these demonic dreams, and I was having all these experiences where we would go to these different New Age events, and I was just like seeing how shallow it was, seeing the depravity in people's eyes, seeing the dissociation in people's eyes, seeing just like how lost everybody was. And I started to notice, like, you know, one of the things that I learned very early on, back when I was in like the personal development sort of Tony Robbins style of, you know, healing and stuff like that, was you want to learn from people who are living a life that you would want to live. And at this point, like in the New Age, I was looking around, and these people who were, you know, supposedly facilitators, they didn't have their life together. They didn't have lasting relationships. They had all sorts of money problems. They had all sorts of sexual problems. They had all sorts of abuse problems in their relationships. They had all sorts of problems. And simultaneously, they're pretending to be super spiritual or making themselves feel like they have something figured out in the spiritual realm, but their physical world was completely falling apart. And so I was just realizing, like, man, this is actually like, there's something missing. There's something missing here. And it was starting to make me really sad. And I was just feeling very, it was weird. It was a weird time, because on one hand, I felt amazing. I, at this point, was running a life coaching business successfully. I was living in Ibiza with my partner in this beautiful place. Like, we had a view of the ocean. It was just super, like, supposedly I was living my dream life, right? But then on the other hand, I was seeing all this stuff that just didn't make sense. And one day, Bob invited us to a Bible study that he was running. And we decided to join the Bible study. And when we went in, we were listening to him talk, and my husband and I, we were both just like writing down so many different questions, And I had this very arrogant idea in my mind that I was going to ask the question that would poke the hole in all of Christianity, and that the whole thing would just fall to pieces, and that I would be the one to like crack the code to make it all fall apart. And so my husband and I both had probably like 3 pages worth of questions when he finished the study, and he asked us like, hey, do you guys have any questions? And so we asked all of our questions, and Bob stayed on the phone with us for 5 hours answering all of our questions. And this was really, really humbling for my husband and I, because for me, like, I really realized that I had this idea of what I thought Christianity was, and I actually had no idea what it really was. And I, you know, always had this idea that the Bible was this like rule book that was constructed by man to, you know, oppress people and uphold the patriarchy and all of the stuff. But then I started to learn about like how deep it actually is, and how much beautiful things there are actually in the Bible. And I just realized like, oh, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, I think I know what Christianity is, but I have no idea what it actually is. And if I'm supposed to have an open mind, because in the New Age, it's all about being open-minded, why am I being so closed off to Christianity? It's like I'm open to everything else in the world except for Jesus. And why is that? So I started to ask myself, like, what's going on here? And I began to realize that there had to be something spiritual going on with why I felt this way, because it didn't really make any sense for me to be so open to everything else, but then so closed to this one thing. And that day, I heard the gospel, and I heard who Jesus actually is. And there was this moment where, Bob told us, like, the foundation of Christianity is really just about believing that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is God, and that he died on the cross for our sins, and that he rose again, and that he's still active and alive today in a very personal way in many people's lives. And when I heard that, something happened. Like, God began to give me a heart of flesh that day, because I felt open to what was being said. And I heard this little thing come out of my heart that just said, I think that's true. I don't know what that really means yet, but I think that that's true. And that night, we got off the call, and my husband and I looked at each other, and we were like, what just happened? Like, what's happening? And I went to bed that night, and the demonic dreams continued. I had another one of those really horrific demonic dreams, and it was looping and looping and looping. And then I finally woke up, and I woke up at like 5 a.m, and we were living in a little tiny house. And so I went out into our outdoor kitchen and just spent the whole morning watching New Age to Jesus testimonies on YouTube and praying to Jesus for him to save me from this. I had woken up that morning with such an anger in me that I was still experiencing this torment in my dreams. And I was done. I was so done with it. And I remember just praying to Jesus and asking him to take it away, and telling him, like, whatever it is that I'm doing to open myself up to these demonic dreams, please tell me what it is and I will give it up. And I watched a bunch of New Age to Jesus testimonies, and I just continued to feel like something change in me. And it kind of continued on where, my husband and I were kind of on the same path as we were like coming out of New Age to follow Jesus, which I am so thankful for. Like, thank you, God, for moving both of us out of this together, because it would have been really hard if we weren't on the same page at the same time. And in those coming weeks and months, we were just asking a lot of questions. We got Bibles, we started reading them, and we continued to just like go through the process of deconstructing all of the things, all of the belief systems that we had about the nature of reality and the nature of being God that were actually a lie. And it was really tough. Like, it felt like our whole world was just being completely turned upside down. And it took time. It took time for things to change. Like, I felt like I had committed myself to Jesus that day when I prayed out to him for him to save me. But there was still a journey of deconstruction to go through. And a couple of the things that really made a big impact for me to realize this was, one of the things was realizing that the first ethos of the Satanic Church is to serve thyself. And that's exactly what the New Age promotes. It promotes serving yourself, putting yourself before anybody else, and, self-actualizing into your own God. And that is the exact same thing that the Satanic Church is teaching. And that really brought a heart of repentance to me. That made me realize, I have been rebelling against God without even knowing it. And I have just been completely serving myself this entire time. It's been all about my own self-love, about healing myself, about becoming God, about all of these different things. It's just me, 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 me. And it's time for me to put that down and start getting closer to God and serving Him. The other thing that really stood out to me was when I got to the scripture that says, "For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." Now, if you remember earlier on, I was talking about my spirit guides that were claiming to be angels of light or beings of light. And when I found this scripture, I realized that my spirit guides were not actually my friends, that they were demons that were masquerading as angels of light. And this was such an eye-opener for me. And as I continued to read the Bible, I realized that I would come across things where I was like, wait, I've heard this before in a New Age context, but Jesus is actually the one who said it originally. They've just been stealing all of this stuff from the Bible and repackaging it into New Age theology, twisting it around and corrupting it for their agenda, when Jesus is the one who actually taught these things first. And so it just continued to unravel. We spent pretty much all of our time just focused on deconstructing all of these lies from the New Age. And eventually we got to a point where we were ready to burn all of our New Age stuff and get rid of everything. We were looking around our house and it was just full of New Age paraphernalia. And we hit this threshold where we were done. And, my husband and I, we weren't married yet. So we made the decision to stop living in sin in that way and, sleep in different bedrooms and change our life around with that. And we burned all of our New Age stuff. And that was the day that the deal was sealed. We were no longer a New Age. We were followers of Jesus, and we burned our New Age stuff and we praised God all night long. And it was just such a freeing experience. I felt like such a burden was being lifted off of me. And another thing that God did, as I continued on, which was really, really important, was He healed me of those demonic dreams. When I asked Jesus to stop those demonic dreams from happening, He really stopped them. He took them away, and I realized that no amount of crystals. I used to grid my bed with crystals and do all of this smudging and chakra work and all of these meditations and things to try and protect myself in my dreams, and none of it worked. But calling on the name of Jesus one time stopped it for good. And that made me realize that this is real. What Jesus has to offer is real. And all of this other stuff I've been trying has been a complete lie. And I really went through this experience of all of the psychic stuff that I was experiencing, where I would hear all of these things from my spirit guides. I would have so much stimulation in the spiritual realm of all of this different information coming in all the time that I was constantly navigating through. I had kind of learned to live with it, but it was a lot. And when I gave my life to Jesus, all of that stuff just went quiet. And I felt such a huge burden lifted off of me to realize that I'm not God, and God got put in his right place again. And I didn't need to be holding the constructs of reality together anymore. I didn't need to be making sure that my thoughts are all perfect and positive, because if I think a bad thought, I'm going to manifest something negative, and then it's going to cause this horrible ripple effect into the universe. And all of that's on me. It's all on me to hold the constructs of reality together, because I'm actually God, and all of my thoughts could have this really profound effect on the outcomes of reality. And all of that just got taken away. That burden just got completely lifted from me when I gave my life to Jesus. And things just got really simple in the most beautiful of ways. And, I was worried that maybe my life was going to be boring from giving my life to Jesus, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's just that my spiritual life became simple. I started to notice that, 5 to 10 minutes of reading my Bible in the morning got me in a better mental place than the 3 to 4 hours of rituals, yoga, tarot readings, cacao, meditation that I would do every single morning just to be able to handle my day. I would do that, and it didn't really do much of anything. Like, maybe it kind of helped, but not a whole lot. But 5 minutes of reading my Bible, all I needed. And rather than having all of this heaviness and this huge burden on my shoulders to do the work so that I could, manifest a better reality, and that it was all on me to save the world as a starseed and as the creator of reality and all of this stuff, I no longer had that anymore, because I was in my right relationship with God as a child of God. And I just had a simple spiritual life rather than having to do all of this stuff all the time. It was just about building a relationship with Jesus. And that was the most beautiful and healing thing ever, just to rest in his love and in his presence and experience just a cleansing of my soul, to just be free of all of this oppression and all of this heaviness that I was experiencing in the New Age. Another really big one was astrology and human design, because I was really in agreement with my astrology chart and my human design chart that said that there's these certain things about me that were just a part of my personality because they were in my astrology chart. And when I realized that those were actually curses being spoken over my life, and that they're not actually coming from God, they're not actually a part of God's identity that he has to me, I came out of agreement with those things. And now I don't experience any of the stuff that my astrology chart says that I should be experiencing in my personality, because it wasn't true. I came out of agreement with it and came into agreement with what Jesus says is true about me as a child of God, and all of the curses of astrology fell off of me. All of the curses of being an empath or being a psychic or being a starseed fell off of me. And there was a lightness in my soul that I had never experienced before. I remember I would wake up and just be so happy that I didn't have a demonic dream anymore. And I would wake up with energy to start my day, an energy that I had never had before in my life. And I knew it was the Holy Spirit coming in me and just like washing me clean of all of this. And so we, eventually we got baptized about a month later, actually on Christmas Eve, which was really cool. We found the one really small little English speaking church in Ibiza. It was amazing. They're so awesome. And we got baptized in the ocean. And the rest is history. It is the best thing that I ever did in my life, was give my life to Jesus. The freedom that I feel every day and the peace that I feel even amidst crazy times. We've been in Ecuador since then, and there's been a lot of really crazy things that have happened here with 12 to 14 hour power outages, flooding, fires. We had a fire really close to our house. Like, there's been a lot of, still challenges. And God is still sanctifying my heart. God is still sanctifying my soul. And so there's still things that, I struggle with that God is healing me from. But there is a peace that surpasses all of that Jesus gives us. That I don't have to seek out different things in order to feel happy, in order to escape my pain, because Jesus gives me a stability and a peace and a sound-mindedness amidst the turmoil. So even if I'm having a hard season, even if I'm going through something tough, Jesus makes me feel peace amidst that. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. I wouldn't trade a relationship with the true living God for anything. And I don't miss any of the rituals that I used to do. I don't miss any of it, because I feel like now my spiritual life is actually simple and effective and pure and beautiful. And it's based on a beautiful intimacy with God that I didn't have before. And I'm just so thankful to God every day for saving me. And so I hope that this video was an encouragement to you. If you are in the process of coming out of the New Age to follow Jesus, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can comment below any questions that you have or things that you want to share. I'll put my TikTok below, and I'll also put the New Age to Jesus community that I'm starting up. That's for women who have left the New Age to follow Jesus. We meet every week on there, and it's a great place to just get extra support with deconstructing everything that there is to process when you come out of it. And just know that if it feels like a lot right now, if you're kind of in the middle of coming out of the New Age, you're realizing that the New Age was a lie, and you're coming to realize that Jesus is the truth, and you're watching all of these New Age to Jesus testimonies, and you're not sure what else to do, focus on Jesus. Focus on really understanding the gospel. Focus on getting into the Word of God and spending time praying to Jesus, and let the love of God wash over you. Rest in His love for you, and everything else will fall into place over time. It's okay if you don't have it all figured out right now. It takes time to deconstruct these things. And it's okay if you don't have all the answers. The answers will come. It's just going to take some time, and that's okay. There's a lot of videos on here where it seems like, they had this big moment and then it all just clicked into place and everything was perfect. And that's certainly not how it happened for me, and that's not how it happens for a lot of people. It takes time to deconstruct this stuff. And if you want to be standing on a real firm foundation with Jesus, it's important that you take your time with it and don't rush yourself into trying to figure everything out at once, because your head is just going to go crazy, and it's a lot to process, as I'm sure you already know. So just know that it's okay to not have it all figured out. And if you need someone to talk to, please reach out to me. I am so happy to support you as best I can. And just continue to seek Jesus, and everything else will fall into place. God bless you.